Masechet Baba Kama Daf Lamed Chet. The Mishnah mentioned the law that Shor Shel Yisrael Shanagach Shor Shel Goy Patur, a Jew's ox that gores a non-Jew's ox, the Jew does not have to pay. But the other way around, the non-Jew's ox that gores a Jew's ox, the non-Jew has to pay a full amount, regardless of whether the animal is tam or mu'ad. So now we analyze it. Amre, mima nafshach, ire ahu davka de goy ki nagach d'Yisrael name li patar, vire ahu lav davka afilu d'Yisrael ki nagach de goy ni hayav. So what's the source for this? No matter what you say, it doesn't make sense that there should be such a disparity. Regarding the pasuk, that if someone gores shor re'ayehu, so what does the word re'ayehu mean? If it means, it's a precise definition, that it means another Jew, well, in that case, when that of a goy gores that of a Yisrael, the non-Jew should not be liable, because the law only applies between two Jews. They have to pay each other. But if a non-Jew is involved, no matter which way, whether they're the victim or the perpetrator, would not have to pay anything at all. And if re'ayehu is not precise and just means another person, not necessarily another Jew, well, in that case, then even if that of a Jew gores that of a non-Jew, then the Jew should be liable, because if it means anybody, then the laws should apply the same to anybody. So therefore, either neither have to pay or both have to pay. How could you derive from the pasuk that the non-Jew has to pay, but the Jew does not have to pay the non-Jew? Amar Rabbi Abu, Amar Kera. Amad vaymoded eres ra'a vayater goyim. Ra'a sheva mitzvot shekibbelu alehem b'nei Noach, kevan shelo kiyemu, amad v'yetir mamonan Yisrael. Rabbi Abu derives it from the following pasuk in Habakkuk, that God stood up and shook the earth. He looked at it and he made the nations tremble. So this is literally talking about how God comes and judges the earth, and so all those who are evil will be judged, and so on. So what did he see? What specifically did he see that caused him to be angry and punish, and caused the non-Jews thereby to tremble? He saw that the 7 mitzvot that Bnei Noach accepted upon themselves, they did not keep. So even those 7, not even 613, and so then he said, now listen, as a punishment to the nations for not keeping the Sheva mitzvot, he says your money is going to be permitted and given to the Jews. Not all their money. It means in this particular case that if a non-Jew will gore the ox of a Jew, then the Jew will not have to pay them, and the other way around, the non-Jew will have to pay full amount even for a shor tam. So really, this is actually, from pure justice, it should be the same. You're right. The question is correct. Either both should pay or both should not pay. But this is as a fine, as a punishment for the Gentiles not keeping the Shev Mitzvot Bnei Noach. They have to pay full amount and they don't get paid. Okay, that's source number 1. Rabbi Yochanan amar mehacha, hofia mahar paran, miparan hofia mamonam leYisrael. Rabbi Yochanan derives a similar law from this, that the pasuk in the introduction to V'zot HaBeracha, describing God coming to Israel, coming to Har Sinai, it says he appeared from Har Paran. This is connected with the famous Midrash that before Hashem gave the Torah to Bnei Yisrael, who said Na'aseh v'nishma, he went to other nations, including Paran, that's where Yishmael is, and said, do you want the Torah? And they said, what does it say in it? And Hashem said, it says, don't steal. They says, we love stealing. That's the basis of our economy, is stealing, so we cannot accept it. So when he heard that, then he said, Hofia, here in the sense of revealed or granted the money of the Gentiles to Israel, because they did not accept the Torah, and they committed themselves to stealing. Since they steal from each other, so they don't value their own private property. Therefore, Israel does not have to either. And so as a punishment for their immorality, their money is given over to Israel. And that's why they have to pay full amount and they don't get paid for damages by their oxen. Tanyana mehachi. So we saw 2 opinions, Rabbi Abu and Rabbi Yochanan, who are both Amoraim, and now we say there's actually a baraita. That says the same thing. Shor sheishos nagar shor shel goy patur. Shor shel goy shenach shor shel Yisrael ben tam ben moad meshalem nezek shalem. Sheneemar amad vaymoded eres ra veyater goyim veomer veofia mehar paran. So the Braita quotes the law of the Mishnah that ox of a Jew that gores out of a non-Jew, the Jew does not have to pay, but of a non-Jew that gores out of a Jew, whether it's tam or moad, he has to pay full amount, as it says in quotes the pasuk in Yechabakuk, and veomer, and it also quotes the pasuk from Devarim. So my ve'omer, the Gemara is going to analyze this baraita. Why is it giving another pasuk? You already have one pasuk. What benefit do you have from the second one? As follows: V'chitem ahay amod v'moded es mibaya lechedich derab matanad uchederab Yosef. Tashema ofir mahar paran miparan ofir memonan le Yisrael. If you say, I need the pasuk of in Chabakuk to teach me a different teaching altogether, that one, the teaching of the Matana or the teaching of Rav Yosef, which we're going to see in a minute. If you say, I need that pasuk for something else, well then I'll give you another pasuk, that one from Devarim, that Hashem appeared to the other nations first, and they rejected the Torah, and therefore Hashem granted these payments to Israel. Good. So that you see that the Braita has both of these pasukim and backs up the statements of the Amoraim. Now we ask, what did Rabbatana learn from the pasuk in Chabakuk? Damar Rab Matana amad vaymoded eres ra'a v'chule mara'a ra'ashem esvot shnistavu alehen b'nei Noach v'lo kiyimum amad v'hegla otam me'al admatam. Here it also is that Hashem saw that the 7 mitzvot that He gave to b'nei Noach, they were not fulfilling, and therefore they deserve punishment. But the punishment is not, as Rabbi Abu said, the taking away from them the payment for oxen, but rather a different punishment, that Hashem caused them to go into exile. We know that the northern 10 tribes, the south went into exile by the Babylonians, but before that, the northern 10 tribes went into exile under Ashur, under Sancheriv. Well, Sancheriv didn't only send Israelites into exile, he also sent other nations. He did this to every nation that he conquered in order to make sure that they wouldn't rebel. He took the top elite from each nation, the top, top 5-10% of the leaders, politicians, teachers, philosophers, military people, and moved them to a different country where they would not rebel anymore. And so that not only Israel, but also the other nations, they also went into exile. Why? What sin did they do? Because they didn't keep the Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach. This idea of the exile, historical truth of the exile of the other nations is very important. Because of that, we say that we don't know which nations, all the nations have been mixed up anymore. So we don't know who is Ammon, Moab, Amalek, all these ancient nations, even if they happen to be on the land, that is the historical land of Ammon and Moab. We don't know if these are actually the people from that original nation anymore. And therefore the restrictions, prohibitions that regarding those ancient nations do not apply anymore after this mixed up of all the populations of the world. Okay, now where does Rab Matana learn that the word vayater, which means literally to permit? Before we said it means that he permitted to them the money. Their money was permitted to the Jews, but here it means to be in exile. Where do you see that the word vayater means exile? Here in Chabakuk it says he let loose the non-Jews. So in Vayikra also, where it says lenater al aretz, the Aramaic is to leap upon the earth, meaning to jump, to move them from one place and exile them to another place. Good. Rav Yosef. What does Rav Yosef learn from this pasuk in Chabakuk, that he can't use it for the oxen law? Damar Rav Yosef amad vaymoded eres ra'a v'chule ma ra'a ra'a shev misot shekibelu alehem b'nei Noach v'lo kiyimum amad v'tiram lahem. Hashem saw that the nations did not fulfill the 7 mitzvot that he gave to them. So he said, you know what? It's permitted to you. So literally, but yater, as in the usual definition of, he made it permitted, right? You can't keep these laws? Okay, forget about it. You know what? There's no prohibitions anymore. So now we ask about that. Itagure itgar. So that means they profited, they benefited from sinning. Imken masinu hoten isgar. We see someone who transgresses and rewarded. It's not, you shouldn't reward bad behavior. So why should that be? It doesn't sound like a punishment. It sounds like a reward. And so Mor, the son of Rabbana, said that this is indeed a punishment, that even if they now do fulfill it, they won't receive reward for it. In other words, it's a merit to have commandments, because a commandment gives you a chance to fulfill the commandment and then get reward thereby. So now they lose the chance to be commanded, and then they do lose the chance to be commended for fulfilling the commandment. Okay, well, now we ask, Vela, is that true, that even if someone is not commanded, they don't get any reward? Is that true, that someone who's not commanded will not get any reward? Look at this braita where the Meir teaches, even if a non-Jew learns Torah, it will be like a Kohen Gadol. How do you know that? Because regarding all the mitzvot, it says that a person will do them. It says ha'adam. If a human will do them, he will live by them. That's the reward. So the pasuk doesn't say if Kohanim do them, or Levim, or Yisraelim, or Jews do them. Rather, it says if a human performs the commandments, he will get reward and live by them. So we see that even if someone is a non-Jew, if they learn Torah, they can rise up to the status like a Kohen Gadol. That's high praise. And so you see, they're not certainly not commanded, even if you say they're commanded in Sheva mitzvot, they're not commanded to learn the whole Torah, and yet they do receive reward. So it's not true that they don't get any reward. Here's the answer. Amre en mekabelin alehen sachar kim suve ve'oseh אלא כמי שאינו מסווה ועושה. דאמר רבי חנינא, גדול מסווה ועושה יותר ממי שאינו מסווה ועושה. Even though they will not get reward as someone who is commanded and fulfills it, but they will get a lower level of reward for someone who is not commanded and nevertheless fulfills it. As Rabbi Chanina said, greater is reward for someone who is commanded and does it. We might think the opposite, that if you have to do something, then okay, you get lower reward. If you don't even have to and you volunteer and go out of your way and do it, then you deserve greater reward. Then there is some logic to that. But it's also human nature that if you have to do something, then you don't want to do it, right? If you give a kid a book and says, as schoolwork, and says you have to write a report on it and you have to for school, they don't want to read the book. But if they happen to pick up the book for fun, then they'll say, oh, it's a good book, and they enjoy it. It's true for volunteers. The best way to ruin a volunteer is by paying them. This is studies that show people that volunteer, and they go to a soup kitchen every day, and they help people. They're happy to do it. But if you start paying them, then they already don't want to do it anymore. How much am I getting paid? When can I get a day off? And so this is human nature, that if I have to do something, then I feel like I don't want to do it. But if I do it anyway, then I deserve greater reward. And indeed, in that sense, it deserves greater reward, because when if someone's just volunteering, so they might do it one day and they might not do it. But to be responsible to fulfill a certain job, and whatever it is, so that means you have to do it, and you can't just take off. So to be responsible for something and then fulfill it, does indeed deserve greater reward. So the punishment, this was in fact a punishment. Originally, the nations of the world were commanded in Sheva Mitzvot, and thereby they could get a high reward for fulfilling that which they are commanded to do. But when Hashem saw that they were not fulfilling it, that's what the pasuk in Habakkuk is talking about, according to Rav Yosef. So Hashem said, you know what? Forget about it. You're not commanded. You could do it and get a lower reward, but I can't rely on you. You are no longer going to be rewarded as one who is responsible for doing so. Tenor Banan, Uchvar shalach malchut Romi shene sera deyotot esel chachmei Yisrael lamedunu toratchem. We have a fascinating story about this law that a Jew doesn't have to pay, but a non-Jew does have to pay, which seems like it's unfair. And so one time, the Roman government sent two military officials, yotot, same, it comes from the same root as the English word strategy. Was asked to do it. It means a soldier or military official. And they sent them to the sages of Israel and said, teach us Torah. Why? Were they just so interested in learning Torah? Well, maybe there were actually, Judaism was actually somewhat popular in the Roman Empire. Many people who thought that Greek mythology was all nonsense, and Roman mythology, if they learned a little philosophy, they knew it was nonsense. They saw the Jews believe in one God, fine people, and they looked up to them, and many converted or wanted to convert. So it could be that they came because they were interested. Another interpretation, I think more likely, is that they were suspicious of the Jews. What are these laws they have in some different language that they go and study? What are these laws? Are they good laws? Are they bad laws? We want to check out this minority religion and people that is under the Roman Empire. So they sent two people to go and check out their laws and report back. So Karu v'shanu v'shilishu, these were some brilliant Roman officials that they went and they read, that means, Tanakh, and they shanu, they learned Mishnah, they repeated it again, and they learned it all very well. Bishat petiratan amru lahem, dikdaknu b'chol toratchem ve'emetu, chutz medavar zeh she'atem omerim, shor shel Yisrael shenagach shor shel goy patur, shel goy shenagach shor shel Yisrael ben tam ben moad meshalem nezik shalem. They said, we analyzed all of your Torah, and it is all good and just, except for one law, this very law, this Mishnah, that an ox of a Jew that gores out of a non-Jew does not have to pay, but that of a Jew that gores out of a Jew has to pay full amount, whether tam and mu'ad. This is a double standard. This is unfair. Right, because mima nafshach, and this is the officials. See, they know, they learned daf yomi. Because doesn't make sense. Ide ayu daf kafilu de goy kinagach Yisrael lipatar, ve'ide ayu lav daf kafilu Yisrael kinagach de goy lichayab. V'davar zeh en anu moderim ota la malchut. Because what does the pasuk mean? If the word ayu is precise, it means a Jew. Then that of a non-Jew that goes out of a Jew, the non-Jew also should not have to pay, because the law only applies to Jews. And if you take the word Ehu not precisely to mean anyone, then even a Jew's ox would have to pay if it goes that of a non-Jew. And so this does not make sense to us. However, because we're so impressed with the whole Torah, okay, we found one law that's problematic, so we're not going to inform this back to the kingdom, right? We're going to keep your secret safe with us and protect you. So that's a very interesting and wonderful story. There is an interesting parallel in the Talmud Yerushalmi where at the end of the story there says that after they left Jerusalem, they didn't reach very far before they forgot everything they learned, right? Just in case they decide later on to tell on the Jews, so they wouldn't be able to, because they forgot everything. Another interesting difference in the Talmud Yerushalmi is that they don't complain just about one thing. They actually find 4 laws that are unfair, unjust. There's a difference between the way Jews and non-Jews are treated. And so in this version, it also says that all of your Torah is beautiful except for, and it says except for Shnei Devarim, except for 2 items. This is weird because there's actually 4 items mentioned. So everybody asks a question about this. Why does it say 2 items if it means 4 items? Professor Rosenthal has a brilliant answer, which is that the Shnei Devarim is actually referring to this ancient Greek work called Disoi Logoi, which literally translates to 2 things or 2 reasons, 2 ways of logic. And this work was a staple of ancient Greek schooling. And in this work, they say that anything that you argue, you can also argue the opposite. So anything you say is bad, you can also argue is good. For example, death is bad for those who die, but is good for grave diggers. And so you can always argue something and its opposite. So this comes to be a classic word to mean, something and its opposite, or a double standard. And so over here, when these Greeks, these Roman officials, they must have known about that, and they said everything is beautiful except for the following double standards. And so a list then 4 double standards. So that's a parallel. There's also a parallel in the Sifre as well. So this is a very important story showing that the rabbis were self-aware that this law in particular seems unfair, that it has a double standard, and while they don't provide any explanation to these Roman soldiers, because they were like, okay, well, it's just one exception, we're all okay with that, the rabbis themselves said that really it should have been that the non-Jews would get paid the same as Jews would get paid. However, this is a punishment, a fine, because they have not kept the other Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, and therefore they are not deserving of the equal treatment regarding nizikin of their oxen. We next have a long Agadah that's only tangentially related to what came before. We were just talking about how if a non-Jew performs a mitzvah, even though they are not commanded, they still get reward for that as someone not commanded. So that theme is going to come up here in the context of Ammon and Moab. Okay, the story goes, Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda shechi bale berata. Rav Shmuel, the son of Yehuda, his daughter unfortunately died. Amru le Rabbanan le'ola, kum nezel ni nachame. Rav Shmuel lives in Bavel, right? It says Rav. Rabbi is from Medinat Yisrael. Rav, anything, is from Bavel. Ula was a sage that went back and forth. He lived in Medinat Yisrael, but he traveled to Bavel often. And so the rabbis in Bavel say to Ula, listen, Rav Shmuel's daughter died. Let's go together to visit and give him comfort. Amar lehu, mai itli gabe nehamata de bablae, de gidufahu, damri, mai efshar le'me'ibad, ha efshar le'me'ibad abdi, and Ula refused to go together with those rabbis, because he said, what am I going to do with the comfort of these Babylonians? Because the usual phrase that they say when they go comfort someone is actually blasphemy. What do the Babylonians say when they go visit someone in mourning? They say, oh, what could be done? What could we do? What's done is done, right? I wish we could have done something. We could have done something to change this matter. But now that it's done, right, we should be comforted. That's what they would say. But that implies that if they could do something, they would. And that denies God's decree. If someone died, that means God decreed. The appropriate thing is to say, Sidu Kadin, right? God is a righteous judge. What's done is done, and this is for the best in God's eyes. He knows better. By saying, right, alas, for what happened, you're saying that it's too bad that this happened and it should have been differently, and that is questioning, challenging God's decision. So therefore, Ula would not go with them. This is very interesting. I mean, it doesn't seem like such a terrible thing to say, and in fact, the Babylonians did in fact say that. You're cheering someone up. But this law is codified in Shulchan Aruch that one should not say, well, what could you do? Nothing, we can't change what happened. But rather, you should look for a spin, or an understanding rather, that explains that this is God's will, and in some way it's for the best. Okay, so azalhu lechudai gabe. So then Ula, he's not going to not visit the rabbi who's in mourning, but he went by himself, so he wouldn't have to join in with the eulogy that the other rabbis gave. And he gave his own words of nehama. We're going to see it's more like a hasi nehama. All right, let's read it and you'll judge. Amar le vayomer Hashem el Moshe ata sar et Moab al tidgar bam milchama. When in the end of the 40 years, when Moshe and Bnei Yisrael are traveling up on the other side of the Jordan, Hashem tells them, do not start up with Moab and don't make a war with them. Now, why does Hashem have to tell Moshe, don't make a war? Was Moshe going to make a war on his own without asking permission? Obviously, if you're going to start a war, Moshe would have asked Hashem and said, I think I should make a war. What do you think? Right? And made sure he would have gotten confirmation from the elders. They would have decided. And so, was he going to do it by himself? That Hashem had to preempt? And it says, yes, in fact, he might have. Because Ela nasa Moshe kal vachomer ba'asmo. He might have learned a kal vachomer on his own that it's appropriate to start a war against Moab. What's the kal vachomer? Amar uma midyanim shelo ba'u ela la'azor et Moab amra Torah soror et midyanim v'kitem otam. Look how Hashem said to go and fight against the Midyanim. After the whole incident, the Midianite woman came and seduced the Israelite men and caused them terrible sin and punishment. So look here how the Midianim actually only were helping out the Moabites. Moab started the whole thing. Balak, the king of Moab, he's the one that said, oh, we got to do something about this nation. Moab is the one that hired Balak from Midian, and he's the one that went and got the Midianite woman. And so really Moab is the main instigator, and yet the Torah says go and go and avenge the Midianites. So he made a kal vachomer. Moavim asman l'kol sheken. If Hashem said that we should go and start a war against the Midianites, all the more so we should start a war against the Moabites, who were the original main attackers. And so Moshe would have decided based on the kal vachomer. He wouldn't have to go and consult Hashem before that war. That's why Hashem had to preempt and say, but don't do that. Amar lo Kadosh Baruch Hu, lo kishe alta al da'atcha, alta al da'ati, shene feridot tovot yesh li lehosi mehen, Rut HaMoabiyah v'Naamah HaAmmonit. Hashem said to Moshe, what's in your mind is not what's on my mind. I have a broader vision, and I see that there is going to be two fledglings, two beautiful doves that are going to come from this nation. That's Ruth, the Moaviyah, and from Ammonim, which is related to the Moabites. They both are from the daughters of Lot, that Naamah is going to come from her. So Ruth, the great-great-grandmother of David, and Naamah, who is one of the wives of Shlomo, and the mother of the next king of Judea, Rehavam. And so these are going to be two very important, wonderful women are going to come from the Moabites and the Ammonites, and therefore, Moshe, do not destroy the Moabites. Even though, you're right, there was a kal vachomer, and they were very evil, and they're the main instigators, and therefore, they deserve to be destroyed. Nevertheless, don't, because we need King David to come from them. And so, you have to keep them alive. Hashem foresaw all that. Now, Ulah is also all part of Ulah's consolation. והלא דברים קל וחומר, ומה בשביל שתי פרידות טובות חס הקדוש ברוך הוא על שתי אומות גדולות ולא החריבן? ביתו של רבי, אם כשרה היא וראויה היא לשאת ממנה דבר טוב, על אחת כמה וכמה תאווה חיה. And here, Ulah says his own קל וחומר. If God, for these two wonderful doves that will come from these nations, Hashem had mercy on these two big nations. He decided not to destroy the entire nation of the Moabites and the Ammonites, as evil as they were. He didn't destroy them because eventually, many generations later, Ruth and Naamah would come from them, and so he saved the nations for them. Then all the more so, this daughter that you lost, if something good would have come from her, if she was going to have a child that would be righteous or grandchild somewhere down the road, then surely Hashem would have saved her, and she would have grown and married and had children. The fact that she did not means that nothing good was going to come from her. That is only implied. He only says if she was fitting and right and something righteous would have come from her, then she would have been saved. And so, don't worry about anything that was lost, possibly lost by her dying young and not having children. You didn't lose anything. She wasn't worthy. All right, so we're listening to this, and this seems to be a bit cruel, to tell him, don't worry, you didn't lose anything. She had nothing going for her anyway. Nothing good was going to come from her. So, don't be sad. Okay, that doesn't sound like great words of comfort. So the Rishonim ask about this, and they say, well, maybe his main point was that she fulfilled her mission already. Her mission was not in life was not that she would have children for a next generation. That's not what she was here for. Whatever she did in her short life, she helped people, she inspired, she taught, whatever she did, that was her mission. And so she was a good person and she fulfilled her mission, but there was nothing more that needed to come from her. Okay, anyway, so those were his words of comfort. The point for us is that we learn from here that even a non-Jew that does something good, they deserve reward. And we're going to see this in the following. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan En HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekapech sechar kol biriya afilu sechar siha na'a. So far above, we only saw that if something good is going to happen, Hashem will withhold punishment even if they're guilty. But now we see that in fact he will reward, even for a small good deed, there is great reward. Look how HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not deprive any creature of reward, even for a small good deed of using speech in a pleasant way. You should never say curse words, disgusting words. You should always use euphemisms, use nice words to describe no matter what it is. And look at the comparison between the two daughters of Lot. Dilu bechira kamra Moav. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe, Al tasar et Moav, al tidgar ba milchama hu dela ha'angaria abid behu. The oldest of Lot's daughters, she called her son Moav, which literally means from father. The name of Moav permanently is this terrible word that has to remind everyone that this child is born of incest between a father and a daughter. So what a terrible name to use. What terrible use of language. Because of that, Hashem told Moshe, Al tasar at Moav, don't start up with them and don't make a war with them. And we infer, okay, Moshe, you can't make a war with them, but if you want to impose on them angaria, forced labor, you can. You can make them forced laborers for you. So you can oppress them, you just can't wipe them out in war. Se'ira de kamra ben ami, amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe, ve'karabtamu lebnei Amon, al tisurem ve'al tidgar bam kelal, ade afilu angaria la ta'abed behu. The younger of the daughters, she called her son Ben Ami, the daughter of my nation. So that's a much nicer way to say it. It kind of alludes that the daughter of my nation, the daughter of a relative, but it's not father. Okay, a daughter of a nation, that could be anybody. And so she used roundabout language that sounded nicer. It has the same implication, but anybody hearing it would just say, oh, daughter of my nation, sounds okay, because she was more careful with language and used language in a nicer way. Therefore, when they come to Ammon, Hashem tells Moshe, don't harass them, don't contend with them at all. Don't even do anything negative towards them. Not only not to start a war with them and kill them, don't even impose forced labor upon them. So look at this, just this one name that the daughters of Lot gave hundreds of years before. One daughter used language in a nicer way than the other daughter, and you see what a big difference it makes later on, that one is going to gives authorized that they will be servants, and the other one that Bnei Yisrael will not start up with them at all. בחירה לשעירה קדמתה 4 דורות ישראל, עובד, ישי ודוד ושלמה, ואילו שעירה עד רחבעם, דכתיב בשם אמו נעמה העמונית. And now another lesson where you see even a small act can lead to great reward, and this time it's the older that did something better. A person should always do a mitzvah as quickly as possible. Don't say, I'll do my mitzvah tomorrow, I could get it done. It's a mitzvah. Do it immediately. Because look, the one night that the older daughter performed her mitzvah before the younger daughter. Now, this is called the mitzvah here, even though it was incest, but they thought that the whole world is destroyed and they're the last 3 people on earth. So From their perspective, they thought they were doing a good thing. But anyway, the fact that she, the Bechira, she went and acted first. So because she acted first to repopulate the world, so she had a merit that she would have 4 generations of rulers before her sister did. Who is that? This is eventually from Moab came Ruth, and Ruth's children are Oved, Yishai, David, and Shlomo, all important people and rulers over Israel. And all that was before the descendant of Naamah, because the younger one, her descendant was Ammon, and eventually Ammon gave birth to Naamah. And Naamah's son was Rehavam, who is the king after Shlomo, right? The name of Rehavam's mother is Naamah HaAmmonit. There you go. It says Ammonit. So we see that for doing a mitzvah quickly, just one night earlier, Moab got a merit to have rulers for 4 generations before Ammon. All right, so that's the conclusion of the lesson. That even a small act, even by a non-Jew who's not commanded, nevertheless deserves great reward. You can imagine all the more so a reward for those who are commanded. Tenor Rabbanan, shor shel Yisrael shenagach shor shel kuti patur, v'shel kuti shenagach shor shel Yisrael tam mishalem chasid nezek, mu'ad mishalem nezek shas shalem. So far we saw the law regarding non-Jews, but now what about the law regarding a kuti? This is a Samaritan. These are the remnants of the northern 10 tribes who took upon themselves the laws of the Torah. They believe in the Chumash only, not Nevi'im or Ketuvim, because Nevi'im and Ketuvim talk about Yerushalayim, and they're from the north, and they don't believe that Yerushalayim is the capital, but rather Shechem. And so they have this in-between status. Are they members of the Berit or not? They're not technically Jewish, because Jewish comes from Yehuda. That means coming from the south. But we're going to say, are they Jewish or not, to mean, are they part of the Berit? Are they obligated in Torah? Or are they not? So here we see the law regarding them when it comes to oxen. If an ox of an Israelite, meaning a Jew, gores that of a kuti, the Jew does not have to pay. But the ox of a kuti that gores that of a Jew, well, then now we apply Torah law. If the Samaritans' ox is tam, they pay half. If it's mu'ad, they pay a full amount. So you see already from here that at least in one direction they follow Torah. We follow Torah law, but in the other direction we treat them like non-Jews and don't pay them. So what's going on here? Rabbi Meir Omer, shor shel Yisrael shenagach shor shel kuti patur, v'shel kuti shenagach shor Yisrael ben tam ben mu'ad mishalem nezek shalem. Rabbi Meir disagrees with Tanakama, and he says we treat them like non-Jews totally. That of a Jew that gores out of a Samaritan does not have to pay, whereas that of a Samaritan that gores out of a Jew has to pay full amount, whether it's tam and whether it's mu'ad. All right, so now we see this machloket. We see that Tanakama is treating them as somewhat like Jews, because at least they do have to pay like Jews. But Rabbi Meir is treating them totally like non-Jews. So now let's analyze. So does this mean that according to Rabbi Meir, the Samaritans are converts by lions? This goes back to the story in Melachim, where back to Sancheriv, who mixed up all the nations and took people out of the 10 north and brought other people in, and so now there's new people and they don't know how to worship they don't know how to worship Hashem, and then lions come to attack them, and so now the people in the north says this is terrible, and they say the reason why lions are attacking because we're not serving the local god here. They were pagans that believed that every country has a god. So they said, we need some Kohanim to come back and teach us Torah. So the king does allow a Kohen to come back and teach them Torah, and thereby they convert. Now, what's the status of that conversion? If they converted only because they were scared of lions, that's conversion under duress, and therefore it's not a valid conversion, and they're really not Jewish. So the Rabbi Meir thinks that they are not Jewish, and therefore he treats them as non-Jews, and that explains the Rabbi Meir's law, whereas Tanakama will treat them, at least in one direction, as Jews. Now, urminhi, we have a contradiction regarding Rabbi Meir. Is that true that Rabbi Meir thinks that Samaritans are not valid converts? Here we have a Mishnah in Masechet Nida. Kol haketamim ba'im berekem tehorin. Rabbi Yehuda metameh b'pnei shehen gerim v'to'im. Miben hagoyim tehorim, miben Yisrael miben hakotim. Rabbi Meir metameh, hachamim metarin shelo nechshedu Yisrael al kitmehen. Okay, this Mishnah is regarding ketamim. This is a piece of clothing, a cloth that has a blood stain on it. And now if it's from a Nida, then it's going to be tameh. But a nidah is only if it's Jewish. From a Torah law, only blood from a Jew causes tumat nidah. Blood from a non-Jewish woman does not cause tumat nidah midoraita. There is a drabanan against it, but not midoraita. Now, there was a place called Rekem. Seems to be in the southeast near Petra. And the people there were not observant of Torah. And the question is, are they even Jewish or not? So according to Tanakama, anything that comes from Rekem, we can assume that that blood stain is tahor because the people that live there are not Jewish, and therefore you don't have to worry about it. Rabbi Yehuda, however, says it's tameh because they are Jewish, but they went off the derech. They're mistaken. They forgot about their Judaism, and that's why, in their actions, they look just like non-Jews. That's why you could mistake them for non-Jews. But actually, originally, genealogically, they are Jewish, and therefore the nidah blood from them is tameh, and so their stained cloths will be tameh. Okay, that's one machloket. And now, in general, when we find something, a cloth with a blood stain, if it's found among non-Jews, it's tahor midoraita because they don't cause tumah. If it's found among Jews or Samaritans, here's why we're bringing this whole thing. Rabbi Meir says it's tameh. So we see from here that Rabbi Meir considers Samaritans to be Jews because he thinks that their nidah blood is tameh. Hachamim say is tahor because we don't suspect Jews of leaving their bloodstained clothing around. Jews know that this causes tumah. They're not going to leave it in public. They're going to put it away somewhere. So if we find it in public, then we can assume that it belongs to a non-Jew. Okay, so this is our main point of our question is here. Rabbi Meir above said that said that for the laws of injuring oxen, we treat Samaritans like non-Jews. It must mean that Samaritans are not valid converts. They are not Jews. But here it says that their bloodstains found among them are tameh. That means they are Jewish. So, that must be that they are true converts. So what are we going to do? So in fact, Rabbi Abahu says, Rabbi Meir thinks that they are in fact Jewish. And that explains the nidah law. But the ox injury law, that is a fine that the rabbis imposed upon them so that the Jews will not assimilate with them. Really, they are good converts and they are Jewish. And so really, you could marry them. However, because they have very different beliefs and practices, they did not want regular Jew, rabbinic Jews to go and fraternize with them and marry them. And so if we treat the law the same, that one pays a Samaritan for damage to their ox, and Samaritan also pays, short of time half and mu'ad whole, then people will say, oh, this is not a law. That law doesn't apply to non-Jews. Oh, I see these people are Jewish. You know what? Maybe we'll have a party with them and they'll end up marrying. So the rabbis didn't want that. Therefore, they made a fine and they said, you know what? Don't pay Samaritans. Samaritans have to pay full amount so that they'll be treated like non-Jews and people will not come to assimilate. Okay, Mativa Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera has a challenge from a Mishnah Ketubot where we see that a fine is in fact imposed even in a law that has to do with a Samaritan. as follows: if ve'elu narot sheyesh mahen lehen kenas habal mamzeret v'al netina v'al akutit v'isa kadata kenas Rabbi Meir b'mamonam hachina men niknosh shekedei shelo yitame'u bahen. The following woman, when she's a betula, she receives a fine. This is talking about a man who rapes a betula has to pay a fine to the father, and this includes, of course, a kosher Jew, but also if she's a mamzeret or a netina or a kutit, a Samaritan. A Samaritan betula, the rapist has to pay. Now, if you think that the rabbis made a fine and they said, you know what, Samaritans don't collect damages or fines. There's a fine to not give a fine here, right? If you say, just like in the law of that according to the Bimeir, in the law of the ox, Samaritans do not collect injury because we want to treat them like non-Jews, then over here also we should not allow the mamzeret to collect this money because she should be treated as a non-Jew. This law only applies to Jews. And so how come the rabbis don't say, oh, you know what, don't pay a mamzeret so that people will not think that she's Jewish and therefore will not come to assimilate? Amar Abaye, Kedeh shelo yehe chote niskar. Abaye explains that this case is different, but because we don't want a sinner, the rapist, to go ahead and get rewarded. Not that he's getting money back, but that he won't have to pay a fine. He should not be able to get away with that. And so making sure that rapists have a deterrent and that they pay what they deserve to pay, that's more important than the gezerah, that someone will think that the Samaritans are Jews and they may come to marry them. So in this case, the rabbis did not impose this penalty and say that the Samaritan shouldn't get money. This is different than the person, if a Jew's ox gores that of a non-Jew, there they lose out. That's less important. That the Jews should be able to get away with his ox going ahead and goring someone. Okay, the ox did act on his own and so on. So there, yes, true. Normally, the owner of the Jewish owner of the ox would have to pay. There, it makes sense to impose such a penalty so that it doesn't come to assimilation. But here, we want to make sure that the rapist pays. Right? Shelo yeh chote niskar. We already saw this phrase, interestingly, in the beginning of this stuff, when we talked about the non-Jews who didn't keep the Sheva Mitzvot, and Hashem said, you know what, you didn't keep them, now you're not commanded to do them. And we saw that also looked like it was that they were being rewarded. In fact, it means the opposite, that they don't get to be commanded and get reward. Okay, now we ask, wait a second, we can actually do two things. Why don't we say that the rapist has to pay, so that way he gets a punishment, and instead of giving it to the Samaritan, we'll take the money and we'll give it to the poor, and that way people will know that a Samaritan won't think that a Samaritan is Jewish, even though they really are Jewish, and they'll think they're not Jewish and will not come to marry them. Why not give it to the poor? And the answer is Amar Rav Mari Mishum Dehaveh Mamon. He says because this is money that has no claimants, right? Who's going to come to claim the money? You need to come to court and get the money out of the rapist. You need someone who's going to come as someone that can come and claim. If a poor person shows up at the court and says, he raped a Samaritan, I want the money, the Samaritan says, I don't want to give it to you, I want to give it to a different poor person. So anyone can. And if another person comes, says, no, I want to give a different poor person. So therefore, no one individual poor person can be the litigant that can come and say, I have a claim against you. And therefore, it's impossible to do that legally. So it has to be the Samaritan that will come and say, this guy raped me, or he raped my daughter, and therefore he has to pay, and so then the payment will go to the Samaritan. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen ve'amen.